Welcome back. Tensions between the United States and Iran are once again drawing global attention. There are diplomatic efforts underway over Iran's nuclear program, but at the same time, military positioning in the region and strong political rhetoric are raising concerns about escalation. For you and I, this can feel like technical and sometimes very distant. For a closer look at the situation, here's John Gabriel from the Associated Press to give you a sense of what's happening.
The United States has launched one of its biggest deployments in the Middle East in decades, and that's amid these tensions with Iran over its nuclear program. Now, this includes a naval armada of some 16 ships, including 2 aircraft carriers, the Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea and the Gerald R. Ford, which is in the Mediterranean heading east. Now, that combined has a lot of attack aircraft, including F-35s and FA-18s. Meanwhile, there's dozens of American aircraft that are stationed in the desert kingdom of Jordan. That could be a location from which the Americans could launch an attack on Iran. That's in part because Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, where America also operates aircraft from, have said they won't allow their airspace to be used in any potential attack against Iran. All this is coming as U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened to militarily strike the Islamic Republic if it doesn't reach a new nuclear deal with America. Now, the Americans and the Iranians are due to meet in Geneva on Thursday, and this might be the last best chance for a diplomatic solution to this. But we've heard from both the Iranians and the Americans. From the American side, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff says that zero enrichment remains on the table. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has said that Iran must be able to enrich some level of uranium. So it does seem like there's pretty big gaps still. So these talks in Geneva might be key in determining whether or not all this military force assembled in the Middle East is used against Iran.
Thank you very much, John Gabriel, Associated Press. But if you look at it at its core, this is about leverage, trust, and whether two long-standing adversaries can manage pressure without sliding into what we don't want to see, an open conflict. Today we break it down in simple terms. Pete NICOLL joins me from Kuala Lumpur via Zoom. Pete, thanks so much for doing this. Let's start here. Let's keep it very basic. At the most basic level, what does each side want right now? What is Washington trying to achieve? That's one. And what is Tehran trying to secure or protect?
Good afternoon, Gerard. Thank you very much for inviting me on. In a crisis analysis such as this, we need to strip away the rhetoric to look at the conflict resources, the risks, and the timeline. So based on the current strategic landscape right now, we can see clearly that the situation has moved beyond a standard diplomatic dispute into a high-stakes standoff, and we have a ticking clock. In terms of what they're trying to achieve, the core interests of Washington versus Tehran at the most basic level is a clash between coercive diplomacy, that is the threat of force to achieve what you want, and strategic endurance, a plan to prevent those threats from actually materializing until you deem yourself to be in a much stronger position, a sort of long game to deflect and deter. So Washington is seeking a grand bargain that goes far beyond the previous 2015 deal entered into by a previous U.S. President Obama and cancelled by President Trump. Washington wants a permanent, verifiable end to all Iranian enrichment,
and they'll be very important. We'll see what can happen.
Total freeze of cell development, which is the delivery vehicle for those bombs, and the dismantling of Iran's regional proxy network, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the various Iraqi forces it support. The current tactic is to use massive military buildup and a 10 to 15-day ultimatum issued in February the 20th to force concessions from a Tehran that has been partially weakened by recent domestic unrest. For Tehran, it is seeking regime survival. The primary goal is to protect the pillars of the Iranian Islamic Revolution, their nuclear program and their government, from external destruction and internal collapse. So for Tehran, total surrender on nuclear and missile fronts is viewed as regime suicide, making limited military friction potentially more attractive than a deal that leaves them defenseless, Gerard.
Now, how real is the risk of military escalation in practical terms? How likely is direct conflict, and what would most likely trigger this?
So the risk of direct conflict is currently assessed as high if the early March deadline set by President Trump passes without a framework agreement between both nations. There are three main triggers that we're looking at. The first one being enrichment red lines. If Iran moves towards 90% nuclear enrichment, weapons grade, as a deterrence signal, that would likely trigger an immediate US-Israeli military strike. The second one would be the Straits of Hormuz, a blockade there. Iran's recent smart control drills on February 16 suggests that a naval blockade is their primary counter leverage in this critical waterway. And any sustained interference with commercial shipping would force a US naval response, particularly to protect the significant oil movements through the waterway. And the third one is really protest suppression. Washington has already signaled that significant state violence against ongoing domestic protests could serve as a humanitarian justification for targeting strikes on Iranian command and control, Gerard.
Why does Iran's nuclear program shape every other decision in this standoff? How does the level of uranium enrichment affect US options and regional reactions? Pete?
Yeah, the nuclear program is very much the center of gravity. It's Tehran's strategic anchor because it dictates the time to conflict possibility. Various sources claim that Iran's uranium enrichment levels, a 60% enriched stockpile, has reduced its breakout time. That is the time needed to produce material for a bomb to less than 2 weeks. This compressed timeline actually removes the luxury of any long-term diplomacy. So the current stalemate is simple. For the US, any enrichment is now viewed as a military threat. For Iran, their highly enriched uranium is their only remaining bargaining chip against a return to total sanctions, Gerard.
I've got one last question for you. For viewers around the world, what clear signs should we watch to know whether the situation is improving or worsening? What, in your opinion, are the practical indicators that diplomacy is working or failing? Pete?
To determine which way the needle is moving, we need to monitor these practical indicators. The first one being signs of improvement that diplomacy is working. That would be International Atomic Energy Agency re-entry by Iran, formal agreement for UN inspectors return to sites like Fordo or Isfahan to monitor and report on Iran's compliance. What we call a war premium drop, a sustained increase in Brent crude prices, indicating that markets are no longer fearful of a Strait of Hormuz closure, and a joint communique, the submission of a written counter-proposal by Tehran before the March deadline, and a willingness by the US to continue negotiations, Gerard.
Pete, thank you so much. Always a pleasure hearing from you. We'll definitely check in with you with regards to developments with Iran and America and them being in Geneva at this point, trying to sort things out. Pete NICOLL, crisis and threat analyst, joining us from Kuala Lumpur. Still ahead, violence in Guadalajara, a deadly accident in Nepal, and a flower war in Greece as carnival celebrations turn colorful. This is The World on Bernama TV.